Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I have a short amount of time to cover two unique topics. I apologize if you hear any background noise. My name is Haresh Advani. I am a security technical specialist with Microsoft, and I'm here today to talk about two topics. Today, the first topic is going to be how you can secure your hybrid and cloud workloads. So I'm going to begin with a topic that we're actually not going to discuss today, and that is the user side of security. In general, when you hear Microsoft talk about Defender or M365 Defender, excuse me, we usually talk about the user side of the security equation, right? That's typically where a user may get affected by an email coming in, and that leads to a host of problems that need to be solved, and we have separate solutions for that. This is a critical piece of security, but it's not in today's topic. I'm bringing it up at this moment to kind of show you and contrast the topic for today. So let me move on to this slide here. So the user side of the game, as I refer to it, where you want to protect endpoints, you want to protect email, and so on, that is really represented on the right side of my diagram here. And of course, there's varying operating systems, there's mobile devices and such, right? Today's topic is really about the other end of the spectrum when you talk about user services. It's the cloud aspect of where those services live. And that is represented on the left side of my diagram here. And so you can see here we have either server VMs, you could have containers in a Kubernetes environment. You obviously have all sorts of data in SQL. And of course, they can be in any cloud, right? These, in fact, our protective services, when we refer to Defender for Cloud, can actually protect on-prem servers as well. And so we'll talk about all this, right? So I wanted to give you this slide here to kind of start off to understand that we are really focusing on the left side of this diagram for this next 10, 15 minutes or so. Now, why is this such an important topic? Well, everybody knows the cloud is, a very big thing, right? 95% of new application initiatives are going to be cloud native. What does cloud native really mean? That really means that the applications will be developed to have been run in the cloud as they were built. So that's a little bit different than the lift and shift that many companies have gone through over the past decade. Of course, I'm not going to read you all these details here, but 87% of companies embrace multi-clouds, and that's an important aspect, right? Now, what this really means, and if you translate this to risk, is that the cloud has become a very big target. If you look at the top right, you have 82% of breaches involved data that basically was in a cloud somewhere. Now, this is made worse because most companies, the way they deal with security and the best of breed mentality, they end up with silos of protection. So I'll show you how the protection that you need really covers the gamut from different types of services, and especially if they're in different clouds. This is a very important topic to make sure that you're on top of. And the least that I mentioned here, of course, is that the cost of the breaches is becoming enormous, right? That's just every year it gets higher and higher cost. Now, one thing to note is that attackers will use the path of least resistance. So you can see here that, yes, many times the common attack is through a user, whether it's an email and someone clicks something, or it's an endpoint. And of course, once an endpoint is affected, the identity is stolen, and then lateral movement happens on the user endpoints. And of course, there's a lot of harm, a lot of damage that can happen from that side of the game. However, much of their efforts, especially if they have identities, if they have data, if they have access to cloud data, that's where it can get even exponentially worse, because servers obviously are serving up all of your data, right? So if someone were to be able to take data, exfiltrate it from your cloud systems, you need to be able to be aware of that at the earliest possible, aside from protecting bigger attacks like ransomware. Now, one of the problems is people using multi-clouds, they have different security systems to protect each. And so, okay, you may know where your data is. you may know if it's internet facing, but you don't necessarily know if all of the uh, uh, security groups and all these other cloud related rules to protect that data are in place, right? Even in terms of secrets that might be exposed. And if you wanted to check if your environment is currently under attack, right? We call it near real time, right? And so that's within seconds or at most minutes of something actually happening, you would be aware of it rather than much longer time frame. So let's talk about what is Microsoft doing to solve this. So we have solutions that cover across all clouds, whether you use multiple clouds, whether you use an on-prem and cloud hybrid strategy. I'm going to be introducing to you our strategy for this topic. So in a nutshell, we know that the data can exist in various places. And we believe that if you monitor this data very well, and if you put your security policies in place, you can have a very good level of protection. So you'll notice here that I'm not going to read out the names here like CSPM, you may not be familiar with, but understand that the posture management needs to be continually monitored, down to, in fact, the CI/CD pipelines for your developers. So I'll show you that it really is a huge shift left motion as well, that we protect the code that's being used in your environment. And then, of course, we monitor everything. Now, monitoring and protecting at the development stage is very important, but at the same time, you need real-time protection as bad things occur. You need to automate the remediation. So there's a huge movement to automate procedures that normally would require human intervention. Now, artificial intelligence is actually my second topic, and I'll be getting to that in 10 minutes or so. So I'll skip that for now. But you'll notice that when we say XDR, in terms of the user side of the game that I showed earlier, XDR really talks about the cross pollination and cross correlation of data for email and devices and such that relate to users. When it comes to XDR on servers, you really need to control all the aspects of cloud services, right? That has to do with identities, especially if you have Active Directory, for example, and you're synchronizing that. And of course, all the different types of cloud workloads, right? Whether they be containers, whether they be SQL, and so on. Ultimately, you also have to keep track of and monitor whether your data is even simply being accessed by the wrong parties, right? So that all falls into the XDR aspect. And in order to accomplish that, we have all these different layers, right? Including the SIM layer. Now, again, there's a lot of statistics here, and this is really just to kind of highlight the importance of this. Once you have enough signals, like Microsoft sees 78 trillion signals per day across all of our security services, these are security signals. We have over 10,000 people, employees that are just focused on security products themselves. This is what allows us to have more insight into the attacker behaviors, right? We're also integrating with many other products. As well as, like I mentioned, for the development side, right? So I'll show you a little bit. That's actually a full topic on its own of how we can protect GitHub and such. But these are basically the benefits and the coverage that we have. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of talk about shifting left, and that really, in my diagram here, is on the bottom. You need to protect the code. You also need to protect your CI/CD pipelines of how you deploy this code and whether you can back off from that code. But you also need to do the network protection, right? The infrastructure protection. And that comes down to vulnerabilities. Even something as simple as a misconfiguration can lead to massive attacks. You also need to protect secrets that might be in that data, and so on, right? I don't think you need me to repeat all this, each item here, but you get the point. There's a lot that goes on between the development of the code and actually making your services run, even if they're serverless, for example, right? So we need a system that correlates all this data, and it can recognize the what we call attack paths, is the method in which the attacker can attack. And then ultimately you need to disrupt this attack with automatic attack disruption. So again, as I mentioned, we need to be able to do all of this, including all of your cloud services, no matter what cloud they're in, and you need to do it continuously, right? And so that is what Defender for Cloud provides. This is what I've been showing various bits and pieces of Defender for Cloud. Each piece is available as needed, a la carte. So if you have a Kubernetes environment, you can utilize, just that piece if you need. One of the big things that I'll show you when we talk about the AI topic is to cut through the noise. There's so much noise in terms of alerts and incidents that come in. You need to really be able to identify them. So if you look at this example, there is some app that has internet exposure, which may have a vulnerability. So here's a CVE. There is potentially an identity that could be stolen. You need to be able to block it there. And similarly, like storage that I mentioned earlier, right? So we need to monitor all of these different aspects. And our entire stack covers everything that I've shown you in terms of the features of Defender for Cloud. So here's another example for the attack path. So this gets, security gets very complicated and very confusing, and it tends to overwhelm a lot of SOC analysts because there's just too much data. Here, if you notice that there's all this users, devices, and so on, what we identify once we can correlate this data, and again, you need the signals coming in for all of this to be able to correlate it. But one of the huge benefits for our and value proposition for Defender for Cloud is that once we see this, we can identify that, hey, you have this application that may not even be internet facing, but there is another set of devices that is internet facing, and those devices have access to this app. So this app is really no longer, blocked from the internet, right? If it has that ability to be manipulated. So this is what we call an attack path, and the attack path analysis is actually a very big aspect of our protection, right? So we look at your entire surface. We are able to create these attack path analysis, and this is really what provides us the ability to guide you in near real time of what is happening and what also could happen, so that you can prepare and block those aspects as well. Show you one more thing here in terms of the shift left concept, right? So you have obviously applications that you probably are deploying. The application itself is one thing. Then you have the middle, which is the configuration and the vulnerabilities and such of the infrastructure. And then you have, of course, the internet exposure of the runtime. You need to protect all of this because any part of this can be circumvented by some, smart attack, for example. So you need infrastructure as a code assessment that's built into the product. You need all this posture management for your data security. And of course, you need to scan for malware, even in your data that is sitting at rest. So I'll show you this last two slides here for this topic. This topic goes quite deep, Defender for Cloud. Forgive me if I've spoken very fast. I have very limited time to cover such a large topic. My point here is that the big picture, if you look at, you have a lot of things to cover because cloud services in any cloud can offer you so many different things, right? You could have VMs, you have containers, even the fact of the resources, the resource objects now get attacked. Obviously, you have secrets, you have databases and all kinds of storage, and then of course you have even serverless applications, right? So that's pretty much my presentation for this part. I'll go back to a slide that I started with that highlights all of the aspects that you need to protect. And again, we talked really on this left side here, which is really just cloud protections, no matter what cloud they're in. You could have services in AWS, Google, or Azure. And one of the things I mentioned earlier in one of the stats, it showed 87% of companies are multi-cloud, right? So it's very important that our protection stack here covers pretty much any cloud, including on-prem.
Hey, Haresh.
Yes.
I always think this is one of the interesting things in the evolution of Microsoft. I look at these as an outside observer. It used to be, Microsoft's strategy was everyone running Windows on your desktop, 10, 12 years ago. And then you see the evolution with Microsoft buying GitHub, embracing the open source community. I think Microsoft is maybe the leading contributor, if not one of the top two or three, to Linux kernel and others. And there's a mindset that we see in that Microsoft says, look, we know you're going to use AWS, we're going to use Google for this. We also have our own solutions in Azure, but it's a focus that we're seeing amongst many of the hyperscalers is to adapt their solutions to what you're doing, as opposed to forcing you to just use a single vendor solution. It's an interesting evolution. All yours, Haresh.
Correct. Yeah, that's a very good point, right? A lot of people think that when we talk about Defender, we talk about Defender for cloud, that it's like only for Microsoft Windows, it's only for Azure. I mean, yeah, the thing is built into Azure, but this supports every cloud. It supports Linux, Mac. I mean, it supports everything that people are using out there. And the reason for that is simple. I mean, we have to protect all this, right? This is what the reality is. These are the attack points. So when I mention correlation and all these other aspects of this data, I mean, if you're using the M365 Defender stack and you're using the Defender for Cloud, all of this gets correlated, right? And then there's so many things that I'm not talking about right now, like Sentinel. There's all of this is correlated and built straight together for basically the best bang for your buck, so to speak, right? Now that actually leads me very nicely into the next 15-minute topic, which is, AI, right? And so now, as far as AI, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to have fun with this session. I know that there's a lot to talk about when we talk about AI, but I'm going to try to give you really the best type of information in the shortest amount of time. The focus for this, I mean, there's a lot of different things to talk about. The focus for today is really generative AI, and even that specifically for cybersecurity. All right, so let's get into this topic. And I'm going to start with, why are we even talking about this? Well, again, we just got off a session that talked about how bad things are, how the attackers seem to be able to do whatever they want, and how the security protections that we have need to be so vast to cover all these different areas, right? And so here's some really cool stats to know. Like even just for password attacks, there are 4,000 password attacks occurring per second. I mean, you will not be able to manage these alerts as they come in, right? There's just too many. And then if that's not already bad enough, the amount of time is getting to be reduced in terms of how fast an attacker can actually access your data. So for example, from the time someone clicks a link that they shouldn't to the time that the attacker actually is accessing your data is as little as 72 minutes, right? And if that's not bad enough, we don't have enough people, right? Skilled practitioners. So this is very timely to talk about how AI can help, because one of the greatest focuses of AI is to be more efficient, right? And so that's really where this topic shines. Now, I put this slide in here because I think this really is a paradigm shift. So a paradigm shift is doesn't happen too often, but when you have to change your thinking because you've been doing things a certain way so long that that just feels like the way it is. A lot of people are confused about AI and what it can do. And again, it is a paradigm shift, right? We need to be able to use these tools for the best that they can help us. And here's some examples, right? To continually assess and improve posture, investigate and respond to threats, and again, it comes down to efficiency, right? To improve the productivity and to do all that in really a very human method, right? Where we can just use natural language. Now, here is a different topic where, if you have a lot of different tools and they're not consolidated, they're not integrated, they don't correlate, you're going to have a very hard time and you're just making your life more difficult to try to solve these problems. So you need a tool set, like I showed earlier, that is all integrated. And on top of that, now it's integrated with the best aspects of generative AI. Right. Now, as we continue here, I want to take a moment and pause because a lot of times, especially in this presentation, I'm not really going to focus too much on the protective aspect. What is Microsoft doing to protect data? That's really not the topic for today. But I just feel like I can't go on with the topic without at least expressing to you that protecting your data and protecting the algorithms, for example, for AI, and Copilot, and like this is the highest priority for Microsoft. Okay, so although I'm not going to get into it in today's session, I just need people as I go through the rest of this to, in the back of your mind, to know that yes, all of this is handled. I'm just not talking about it today, right? So just keep that in mind that there are so many different layers of protection that is happening at the AI layer, even as far as rogue prompts, and there's so many different things we could talk about. Now, I'm actually a Microsoft certified trainer. And one of the courses that I'm targeting next is for AI. And so I pulled just a few slides out of that because I wanted to just introduce the difference between generative AI and other AI. So I'm just going to take a minute to kind of level set this because I really personally, I feel fundamental knowledge is critical. A lot of times we get very technical and then we miss the fundamentals, right? So this is just one of two slides I'm going to show you from the AI course. And really, the only thing I'm going to say here is that from all of these different types of technologies that are used in AI, all of the top ones here, and let's ignore generative AI for a minute, all of these, everything else here, really is the part of the AI that we've all known, right? We've known there's machine learning. We've known that AI can look at images and do things with images. But ultimately, what I'm trying to simplify for you is that all of these methods up here at the top, all they can do, and I don't want to minimize it, but basically what they do is to look through tons and tons and tons of data and regurgitate it for you. That is what machine learning does. We watch things and we can give it back to you, right? And say, well, when this happened, this is what we did. But the big difference between generative AI, and this is why you keep hearing everybody talk about generative AI, right? All these solutions that you see with Copilot, they are all using generative AI. The difference is that generative AI, as its name implies, can actually create data, right? And so you can take all this knowledge that we've had, sift through millions and millions of data points, but then we can not only summarize it, for example, but we can create new data. Now that is why this is such a big deal, because until now you needed the human aspect, right? The ability to think, to be able to create new content. Right. So this is my second of the two slides on what is generative AI. So again, generative AI creates original content in response to your prompt, right? And in this case, it's natural language prompt in I think 27 different languages, right? I have that in one of the slides. So the point is, I just want to take a minute to talk about what generative AI is and why it's such a big deal, right? So now, as you see, what do we do with this concept? What do we do with the algorithms that we've created in this category? Yes, it will use machine learning. Yes, it will use visual graphics abilities and all this other stuff we talked about. But the real secret is for us to be able to create content for you. Now, Microsoft has a lot of different co-pilots. If you've seen anything about this, you'll know that there's a Copilot for Microsoft 365. There's a Copilot for Dynamics and so on, right? You can have Copilot in Office, like I mentioned. But what we are talking about here is really just this one, which is the cybersecurity Copilot, right? It's called Copilot for Security. So let's get into this Copilot for Security for the next 10 minutes or so. So again, the core basis for pretty much every generative AI is still going to be all these things I talked about where you have machine learning. And the core for its success is going to be all the data that you provide it, including the vast threat intelligence that Microsoft has, right? Microsoft is a leader in this category of having that intelligence. And so again, and then we integrate all of our best practices, right? And we create solutions to the prompts that come out. So let me show you a few things that you could do with this, right? So we can, again, because there's so many attacks and the timing is a critical aspect for you to be successful, you need to be able to respond in minutes and not even take hours, right? If 72 minutes is the time it takes for someone to be already having your data, you can't wait an hour or 2 hours to get to this, right? So you need assistance for this, and this is what Copilot for Security provides you, right? To be able to protect at the speed and scale of cloud, protections, right? And cloud workloads. Now, in here, you see 3 minutes to do a task that took a few hours. If anybody's used ChatGPT or any type of AI, you know the first thing, your first reaction is that, wow, that was quick. But one of the things that you may not realize is that it can simplify very, very complex things, like looking through entire sets of data and documents. you can catch what, you might miss if you're looking at it yourself. And the other thing is, I mentioned there's a huge shortage of talented cybersecurity professionals. And this actually is one of the coolest tools. We don't think of this as training, but this is a massive training tool because you could take lower end, tier one, let's say, analysts, and they could be armed with being able to see what's happening in your environment without really having that experience that the higher levels might have. Now, some of the use cases here are mentioned here. There, you can summarize the incidents. That's usually a big deal because if something's happening in your environment, you may not really be aware. You can reverse engineer scripts, and that usually requires a lot of expertise. You could do impact analysis, like how bad is this attack that's happening? How many devices is it on? All that kind of thing, right? This will immediately give you that type of response. And then the generative aspect is, what should I be doing about it, right? The guided response. Now, Copilot for Security is actually available in once you have it, you could use it in two ways. You can use it right within the products themselves. So if you're in Defender, console, you can have Copilot helping you here. And this is different. I should mention this, right? The Copilot that people are used to, where you go online and you ask, Bing Copilot for some help or ChatGPT, that is specifically for web. This is kind of like that, but this is looking at your security alert data and it's correlating all that. So it'll tell you, hey, these 10 devices have been attacked, right? Now you can do that from the portal, but you can also do that from an individual console like this, right? And so that's considered a standalone experience. Now I have a lot more details here, but we don't have much time. So I'm going to skip some of these, but we can, if you're interested in this, we can actually set up live demos for this. Here are some examples of what you could do with this. These are very, very simple prompts. You can really create some very complicated prompts. Your prompt alone can be paragraphs. So, I mean, the data, will be full reports if you need, right? And diagrams and such. Here's a few. I'm just going to skip through this quickly. But again, you can summarize your incidents. You can ask for help to see what has happened as far as impact. You can reverse engineer scripts, as we mentioned. Again, this usually requires a lot of experienced personnel. And this is, I think, to me, I think this is the best, especially for the less senior analysts, right? Like, what should I do next? First of all, which attack is more critical? What should I be doing about this attack? It gives you clear, actionable steps, right? Very, very powerful. Now, how powerful is this? Because of course I'm with Microsoft and I'm going to say everything is great, but look at this, summaries here, right? So people have found when they research this and tracked it, there's 49% more facts in incident summaries. And then that's kind of expected, right? Because it's a computerized generation of facts. It's not going to miss anything. But it's also faster at summarizing the incident. Nobody likes to do this kind of paperwork of summarizing report writing, right? Again, even it's faster at analyzing scripts. And this is not even mentioning the fact that you don't even need to know how to do it, right? It's more accurate, 12% more accurate. And again, now what we did is we had a test where we had a bunch of people utilize Copilot for Security in their environment. It was a controlled trial where some people did not have access. But from the people who had access, I'm just going to skip to the right here. Pretty much all of them, when we said, can we take this away from you or do you want to use it again? Everybody pretty much said, hell yeah, I need this again. So 97% reported they want Copilot the next time they do this type of security work. I mean, this is so powerful that all I'm trying to say is you need to look at this if you haven't looked at it. Now, I know I have only 3 more minutes. I want to talk about something very important that I said was not included in today's topic. And that is really the security aspect, right? Is this thing safe, right? There's so much talk about, is this thing safe? Is it not safe? What are you doing with my data? So I just want to go very quickly to say, there are a lot of risks. There are a lot of risks. Nobody's denying that there are a lot of risks. The question is, what are we doing from an ethical and responsible perspective to make sure that we minimize those risks? And we're constantly checking this like we do with everything else. So as I mentioned earlier, that I want you to have some peace of mind that Microsoft is doing a tremendous amount in making sure that the AI is built responsibly. It really covers all of these categories, right? The reliability, safety, fairness, even inclusiveness, right? I really haven't touched on any of these. I really just talked about the privacy and security. I just need you to be aware that there's entire topics, conversations we can have to the level at which Microsoft is protecting not only your data, not only our systems, but the accuracy of the algorithms, the responses that come from these algorithms, and really everything that has to do with even prompt engineering, right? It's all being tracked. Excuse me. So this is a good example here of all the things that we do that I mentioned already, but like even your data that's at rest is encrypted. Your data is stored in your region, inside of your tenant. That data doesn't go anywhere outside of your tenant, right? So it's not shared with OpenAI or anybody else, right? And so this is why I wanted to mention this, that even though this was not today's topic, you should rest, with the knowledge that there's a huge amount of data we could provide you on this level of protection that we do. So this is, I think, my last two slides. I wanted to show you again how our entire suite fits together. We talked about, end user protections, which we didn't cover in this session. We talk about all of these server level protections. There's topics here I didn't really talk about, like compliance and purview, right? And then really in the center of it is Copilot for Security, because Copilot for Security has part of the portal in really each of these. When you're in Purview, you can pull up Copilot for Security within that view, and it'll give you information that's relevant to you in terms of compliance or for Intune and so on. Now, some people say, well, but this is good, but this is only Microsoft data. What about something else? Well, Copilot for Security has a huge partner ecosystem. So we are working on building this. In fact, this thing should get even bigger in terms of what we can support. But what this slide is showing you at the top is all of these different companies that can help you make this work in your environment as far as the type of data. And then here you're talking about all these different data sources that can be brought into Copilot for Security. And then all these things that I talked about where we can correlate the data will now correlate, including this level of data. Right. So this is very, very powerful. And I think together with the two topics I covered, um, this is a very high level of protection that you can have for your environment, no matter what cloud it's in. So that is, I brought back my first slide. My name is Haresh Advani. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to reach out to me. My email is right there. And thank you, Ron, for allowing me to present.